Hello, today is Wednesday, September 6th, and welcome to episode 248 of Fault Lines as we continue our Summer of AI series, Breaking Barriers, Understanding the AI Revolution. I'm excited to be here today with Republican presidential candidate Will Hurd. Before announcing his campaign, Mr. Hurd served 3 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives for Texas's 23rd Congressional District and worked with OpenAI as a board member. Prior to running for Congress, Mr. Hurd was a CIA operations officer for 9 years and served as a senior advisor to Fusion X, a cybersecurity firm. Mr. Hurd, thanks for joining us on Fault Lines.
Hey, Lester, appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So you've had, in addition to running for president, you've had an amazing career in the CIA and in Congress, among other things. And I wanted to kind of, before we get deep into the current issues of the day, kind of ask you some historical questions. So you were at the agency in the early 2000s. Can you talk about the extent to which you dealt with artificial intelligence issues at that time in our national security infrastructure?
Do y'all hear that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's some sort of first responder here in downtown
gotcha.
DC.
And Tatum, I can go answer. I'm just going to take that question. You'll cut all this out. Okay.
We got a week to edit, so go ahead.
So AI specifically didn't come up early on in my career. I would talk about it more broadly about how intelligence services were using technology in order to find out who we were and who our assets were, or how we would be able to use and leverage technology to do our jobs better. And just for some context, right? Google Maps didn't exist when I started my career. And so when you're doing a surveillance detection route, this is going out and determining whether or not you have surveillance on you before you go meet someone who's giving you secrets. We would have to go make maps ourselves because in some of these places you didn't have it. So AI specifically, I can't remember at the early parts of my career. But the broader threats of technology absolutely was an issue. When it came to, biometrics was probably the closest because, look, I had a number of aliases. So that means you're crossing international borders under a different name. And so some of the early issues was on biometrics, specifically facial recognition and fingerprints, that kind of impacted the ability to conduct intelligence operations.
I feel like there's like 1,000 questions I could ask about what you just said, but let's fast forward a little bit to your time in Congress, 2015 to 2021. How did AI issues come up then? That was before ChatGPT was really rolled out. Can you talk about kind of that period of your career and whether you face these issues?
Well, I was the first one to hold a hearing on artificial intelligence in all of Congress in 2015, which, thinking about it now, is pretty crazy. I was the first. And how did that come up? Jason Chaffetz was the chair of the Oversight and Government Affairs Committee. And when I first won the election in 2014, he had called me and asked me to come be a subcommittee chair. And when he called, I didn't have the what's the appropriate word? I felt bad to tell him no over the phone. I was going to probably send him a text. And then the guy who was going to be my chief of staff was like, no, a freshman getting a chair of a subcommittee, that's a big deal. You're going to take it. And he wanted to create a committee on technology. And our job was to look at privacy, cybersecurity, and emerging technology. And that's really where my focus, so my degree is in computer science. And so these issues are something I've been dealing with ever since I was in high school. I worked at a company called Southwest Research. I interned. I didn't work. That's the big difference, right? Like I don't know if there's anything I did at my time there that was very valuable to the firm. But being exposed to robotics and all that when I was 15, 16 years old, so that kind of started my arc. But in Congress, the first hearing, I remember it like it was yesterday because I was excited. I thought we were going to be talking about how long is it going to be for me to be barreling down Interstate 10 in my driverless car and have a drone come drop Whataburger through my sunroof, right? Whataburger is a chain here in South Texas. Actually, it's a lot of places other than just Texas. And it ended up turning into a conversation about, are we going to have drones peeping in our windows, right? And I remember thinking, I'm like, we're not worried about the UPS driver or the FedEx guy peeping in the window. And to keep that amount of data on a server, it would just be impossible. And so you saw early on kind of the fears of this. But I would also say that from that hearing 8 years later, I would have thought that use of drones would be a little bit more ubiquitous than it is today. Look, it's even hard to like try to go out and buy a commercial drone now with all these issues. So that was the beginning. And I remember before that hearing, I did it. So we had that hearing, and then I did another series on AI. And I went out around the Capitol complex and just grabbed people and said, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when I say AI, artificial intelligence, right? And it was wild. It was, if people were younger than me, they would say Ava, the femme robot that killed somebody in the movie. What was the name of the movie?
I'm forgetting.
It'll come to me. It was an excellent movie. Or people would say HAL 5000 or 10,000 if they were older than me, right? And so what's fascinating though, even 8 years later, those are some of the same issues people bring up when you ask them, what does AI mean to you?
Okay, so since you
Ex Machina, that was the name of the movie.
Machina.
Ex Machina.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think I'm more in the 2001: A Space Odyssey category, which may say something about my age. Anyway, after you left Congress, you were on the board of OpenAI, which of course is very directly related to artificial intelligence. Can you talk about what you saw while you were on the board of that company? And I guess you had to step down for your presidential run, but just interested in kind of your perspective from the private sector most recently.
I saw a handful of individuals create something that's pretty amazing and do it in a way that nobody thought was possible. And seeing how innovation is moving so fast, how this topic is moving so fast, I thought I had an understanding of advanced technologies like AI. I didn't realize how little I actually knew going into a place that's working on it. And then I also saw, look, when we released ChatGPT, and the CEO has talked about this, it was a pretty low-key release on November 30th. And part of it was, hey, we have this thing, it needs to be out in the wild and see how it really performs. And it was low-key because we had been working on other issues and didn't think it was all that interesting. And then the world changed. And that was a moment. The release of ChatGPT will be a moment in the timeline of AI for the rest of history. And so, what was fascinating for me is being involved and looking at some of the strategic issues on a technology that I equate with nuclear fission. Nuclear fission controlled gives you nuclear power, clean, efficient, can power the world. Nuclear fission uncontrolled gives you nuclear weapons, which can destroy the world. And I think artificial intelligence, and more specifically artificial general intelligence, has that same level of power.
All right, so let me ask you, based on that answer, how do we control AI? Should we control it? How do we control it? Is it the government? Is it the market? Is it some combination thereof? How would you, as president, take steps to control AI?
Yeah. Look, so first step is, it's a mix of government and industry. And I think the government, step one, AI needs to follow the law. Let's not carve it out. We saw the errors in carving out social media. We know now, several, 25, maybe 30 years later, not that long, 20 years, that social media has led to young girls increasing self-harm and cutting themselves. We have seen it's led to an increase in hateful rhetoric. All of these things were you don't see as much in radio and television, right? Because there is the Communications and Decency Act. So carving social media out of the Communication Decency Act was a wrong move. Why do we have a cybersecurity industry? We have a cybersecurity industry because we carved out software from product liability. And so let's not make those mistakes with AI. So it follows the law. We have a lot of rules on civil liberties, protecting civil liberties and civil rights. AI has to follow that, period, full stop. The second thing, really powerful AI should need a permit. Now, we can have some debates about what really powerful AI is. I can make an argument that we haven't seen the really powerful AI that I'm talking about that requires some kind of permit. I don't care about Amazon's algorithm to provide me better socks or T-shirts based on, my previous purchases. And yes, I do buy my socks online. But if you and I, Lester, wanted to go build a parking lot, guess what? We would need a couple permits to do that. So really powerful AI should have that. And that permit should be coming in weeks. It shouldn't be a year-long process. And NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, it has the capabilities to evaluate, to make sure when they look under the hood, before this powerful AI gets out into the wild and is involved in the public, being able to access the public, that somebody is making sure that we're doing red teaming of it, that we're looking at the models, the machine learning models appropriately, all those kinds of things. That's the second thing. Third thing, government needs to use this stuff. It shouldn't take months for a veteran to get an appointment with the VA. It should take minutes. It shouldn't take months for someone to get a passport renewed. It should take minutes. So the government should do a sprint to be using these tools in the government when it comes to consumer or constituent facing services. And then the fourth thing I would do in kind of the Hurd administration plan on how to tackle AI is make sure every student has an AI tutor. The tools exist today for a kid or a seventh grader learning trigonometry to have an infinitely patient tutor that teaches you how to fish rather than gives you a fish. We have the technology for a 30-year-old who wants to change industries and maybe become an electrician, to have a tutor that can help you pass those tests. And so that is anybody should be able to have access to that. And those are four things that I think is how we begin, and that's just the beginning, how we begin to ensure we take advantage of technologies like AI before it takes advantage of us. Now, there's a lot of other issues like national privacy law and all those kinds of things where I think should happen. I think everything that happens on the internet is something that, anything I do in my digital life, I control. It is mine. I get to decide how to do it. Now, that's not how any of these systems are set up. These are much broader topics, but those four things I outlined has overwhelming support, can be done immediately, and would go a long way in making sure the trajectory of this stuff is appropriate.
Let me ask you a very niche question. I taught a graduate level class last semester on Congress and foreign policy, and every single student used ChatGPT to help with their final paper.
Sure.
Do you think that's a good idea, or should in our educational system, should we be pushing students to rely more on themselves, or should it be okay for them to use a tool like ChatGPT?
Do you have those people writing papers without using the internet? Do you make them go into the library and pull out books? If there's math problems, are they allowed to use a calculator, or do they have to do long division? Right. And so this is a tool. It's here. And the quicker and the faster people use it and learn how to deal with it, the more successful. And there's going to be a broader, we always talk about the the technological gap or the fact that people don't have access to the internet or devices. But this is another one that we're going to have to make sure people have access and should be using it. The question should be, Lester, you got to start asking them you got to start having them answer tougher questions, because now, doing basic research shouldn't take that long. Look, I explained to some students recently. I always ask folks if they know what the card catalog is. And a lot of people are like, I don't know what that is. Well, back in the day, when I was in like middle school and high school, and you had to check out books from the library, and it was like that one book, and you would go to the librarian and be like, listen, don't let Brett Szymanski extend that book because I need it, right? We don't have to do that anymore. So the questions we were getting asked then should have been pretty basic, right? Because we had to go out and get the information. So now, so I think what AI has the ability to do is to help us push us up this kind of this improve our knowledge gap and push us up the stack to higher order things. And now when we look at in synthetic biology or in medicine, the fact that we're able to decide what a protein a chemical bond looks like, and that's going to help us provide a better medicines in a quicker fashion. This is where we should be moving to. So that starts with, this is a tool, use it, but ask way tougher questions, right? So that you're showing that you're only using it as a tool, not as a replacement.
I love that answer. All right, let me ask you quickly. I know this is a huge topic about competition with China and AI. What are the U.S.'s strategic advantages? What are China's advantages? How should we be thinking about this geopolitical challenge with respect to artificial intelligence?
It was fascinating. I was in New Hampshire, and somebody asked me this question, and they said, well, Will, are you afraid with some of the things you're proposing that you're going to allow the Chinese government to have, get a leg up? I'm like, the Chinese government sees AI as a threat to themselves, because this, something that's going to give people more power and make them smarter and understand things more. Like, look, this is why all the Chinese development in this area is going to ultimately be controlled by the state. There are no large language models that are being developed in the U.S. federal government. It's all the companies outside that are doing that. So the ultimate strategic advantage for the United States is that all the programs that we're developing are free, open, and fair. Now, the leg up that the Chinese government has is they don't care about privacy or civil liberties. Why do we think the TikTok algorithm is really good? Because it's probably been trained on way more data than anything any European or American company has ever been able to do. And so that's kind of the difference. But the Chinese government's going to always want to control it. And so the United States, we need to be making sure we're working with our allies on this. The US and Europe needs to drop this beef on privacy. Our two entities agree more on privacy than Europe and China does than us or China. We can't let the European regulation on AI become similar to what GDPR was. The difference is GDPR almost became a global standard because all these American companies were already having operations in Europe. AI is still growing that a lot of companies may just be like, okay, whatever, we're not going to do stuff in Europe then. So for me, if we're going to deal with an adversary that doesn't care about civil rights and civil liberties, we need to be working with our allies on this.
Have you given any thought to how the rapid development of quantum computing could impact AI and what we might need to be doing in anticipation of that?
Sure. So getting to artificial general intelligence, which is AGI, is an algorithm that's smarter than most people on most economically viable work. That's kind of, let's call that that's what's going to begin this singularity or this moment in time. You do not need quantum computers to get to that point. Now, you need a really humongous processing power that requires a lot of electricity to get to that point, but you don't need quantum. However, quantum computing could potentially get us there quicker if it comes around. And so I think there's some debates as does AGI and quantum develop almost at the same time? And so I don't know the answer to that. And so, but these are two things that are interconnected. And the biggest concern right now on quantum is in making sure we have quantum resilient encryption across all of our important industries and services. I also remind young folks, I always talk about Y2K, and most people don't know what Y2K is. And I remind them that the U.S. government spent $4 billion. There was a special committee in the Senate on Y2K. They spent $4 billion in 3 years getting all of the software in use in the government and critical industries to change the year from 2 digits to 4 digits. 4B, right? That's crazy. Moving to quantum resilient encryption is a significantly harder task. And what's fascinating is so many people don't even understand what that is and just focus on that. So that to me is the ability of our adversaries to disrupt our financial systems, our telecommunication systems, our intelligence systems. That's the biggest concern right now that we need to be preparing for. But there is a long term, in my opinion, you're going to see wherever we are in AI, when quantum computing becomes a real thing, you're going to see an even bigger exponential growth in the capabilities of AI because of that.
Final question. I know you're out there on the campaign trail a lot of these days, talking to Iowans and folks from New Hampshire. What are the concerns of average Americans about AI as you've picked up in the last few weeks?
Look, I get asked 3 questions everywhere I go. Some question about Ukraine, and most of it's like, how do we prevent that from becoming a forever war? I get a question about China, and really it's like, how do we make sure we don't get surpassed by them? And the third question I always get a question about AI, and usually it's because 65% of Americans think AI or a robot is going to take their job, and so the question is about how is this going to impact my industry? And what do I do? And what do my kids and my grandkids need to do to be ready for a world that's going to look very different in a couple of years because of this powerful tool? And this is actually one of the reasons why I'm running. Look, I'm a dark horse candidate. I recognize that. But when it comes to this new Cold War we're in with the Chinese government, when it comes to making sure we're taking advantage of technology before it takes advantage of us, when it comes to the fact that our kids have the worst grades in math, science, and reading that they've had in this century. These are all major issues that are going to affect our quality of life, and it's going to affect whether America can do for the next 247 years what we have done for the last 247 years, and that's create a quality of life that's an envy for the world. And so this is a real thing. I get asked that question about, should my kid be using ChatGPT to do their homework? And then I have business leaders coming up to me and saying, hey, what should I be doing in order to make sure I grow my business? So it's exciting to me. And this is why I'm in the race. And I hope some of the folks that are listening to this podcast, believe we need a candidate like this and go to hurdforamerica.com. That's HURD and get involved in this movement.
Mr. Hurd, thanks for being with us, and we wish you the very best on the campaign trail.
Thank you, Lester, and thanks for highlighting these important issues.
All right. That's a wrap for today's episode. Thanks so much to Mr. Hurd for joining us, and thanks to Tatum Clifton, Aidan Pascoe, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Fault Lines is now on YouTube, so be sure to check out our channel for a video of today's episode and to catch up on past episodes. If you liked what you heard, and saw, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, and share with your friends and family.